The knock came at 6:47 in the evening, and Adrian Cole almost didn't answer it. He was in the middle of reheating leftover pasta, one hand stirring the pot, the other holding a worksheet his daughter Zoe had left on the counter. Something about long division that she'd been struggling with all week. The knock came again, sharper this time, and he set the spoon down on the stovetop and turned off the burner. He wasn't expecting anyone. He never was these days. Through the frosted glass panel beside the front door, he could make out the shape of a woman. Tall, still, the kind of stillness that didn't suggest patience so much as precision, like someone who had decided exactly how long she was willing to wait and was counting down in her head. He opened the door. She was dressed in charcoal gray, a blazer that probably cost more than his monthly groceries, tailored slacks, low heels that were still somehow authoritative on his porch. She had dark hair pulled back and eyes that were steady in a way that made him feel, for one strange second, like he was the one who'd knocked on her door. "Adrian Cole?" she said. "Yeah, my name is Renata Sinclair." She said it the way people say their name when they expect it to mean something. Then she held out an envelope, cream-colored, sealed, with his name written in ink on the front, not printed, handwritten in careful letters. "I'm here on behalf of my father." Adrian looked at the envelope. He did not take it. "Who's your father?" Something shifted in her expression, not quite pain, something closer to the effort it takes to keep pain from showing. "Gerald Sinclair," she said. "I believe you knew him as Jerry." The name hit him somewhere behind the sternum. Jerry Sinclair. Adrian hadn't said that name out loud in 11 years. Hadn't let himself think it much, either. Not because the memory was too painful, exactly, but because it was the kind of memory attached to so many other things that pulling on it meant pulling on all of them. His marriage. The business he'd believed in. The years he'd spent rebuilding afterward. He stepped back from the door without quite meaning to. "You should come in," he said, and even as he said it, he wasn't sure why. Maybe because she was still holding the envelope and he couldn't stand there staring at it on his own porch. Maybe because somewhere in the house Zoe was going to wander out any minute wanting to know when dinner was ready. And whatever this was, it wasn't something for her to see. Renata stepped inside. She looked at the house the way people do when they're trying not to look, taking in the framed photos on the wall beside the door, the small backpack hanging on a hook, the construction paper drawing of a dog that Zoe had made in second grade and that Adrian had taped up next to the coat rack because she'd asked him to, and he hadn't been able to bring himself to take it down. "Sit anywhere," he said. He moved toward the kitchen table and gestured at a chair, then sat across from her. The envelope was between, didn't open it. She didn't push it toward him either. She just folded her hands on the table and said, "He's dying, my father. Pancreatic. They told him 3 months in February, and it's now May, so." She stopped. Started again. "He asked me to come. Why not come himself? He's not well enough to travel, a beat. And I think, honestly, he was afraid you wouldn't open the door." Adrian looked at the envelope. "What is this? A letter?" "In his handwriting. He wanted you to have it before." She stopped again.
He said her name and she looked up.
"Why are you here? Not a lawyer, not a courier. You!" The steadiness in her eyes flickered just once. "Because he asked me to be," she said. "And because I wanted to see for myself." "See what?" She didn't answer right away. Her gaze moved briefly to the construction paper dog on the wall, then back to him. "Whether you were the man he told me you were," she said, "or whether I'd been wrong to believe him at all." He made coffee. He didn't know what else to do with his hands, and it gave him something to do that wasn't sitting there staring at a sealed envelope from a man he hadn't spoken to in over a decade. Zoe appeared in the kitchen doorway in her socks, one of them sliding half off her foot, looking at Renata with the frank curiosity of an 8-year-old who has not yet learned that staring is considered rude. "Who's that?" she said. "A friend," Adrian said, and then felt the word land wrong, because Renata was clearly not a friend, and Zoe was old enough to know the difference between a friend and someone sitting at the kitchen table with an untouched envelope in front of them. "I'm Renata," Renata said. She said it without the formality this time, just her name, plain and warm enough. Zoe considered this. "Do you want to see my homework?" "I don't understand part of it." "Zoe, I actually used to tutor math," Renata said, and something in her voice had changed, the precision softening into something that might have been genuine. "In college." "What part don't you understand?" Zoe was already moving toward the counter. Adrian stood at the coffee maker and watched Renata Sinclair, whose father had, in one single decision 11 years ago, dismantled the foundation of his professional life, lean over his daughter's long division worksheet and say gently, "Okay, so the trick is that you're not really dividing. You're asking a question. You're asking, How many times does this number fit in here? He poured 2 cups of coffee and didn't say anything. After Zoe went to bed, after the worksheet was finished and the pasta reheated and Adrian had stood in his daughter's doorway long enough to watch her fall asleep with one arm around a stuffed rabbit, he came back to the kitchen and sat down. The envelope was still there. Renata was still there too, though she'd moved to the chair nearest the window, and she was holding her coffee in both hands and looking out at the backyard, where the motion sensor light had clicked on over nothing. A raccoon, probably. They'd been getting into the compost bin all spring. You don't have to stay, Adrian said. I know. She didn't move. He picked up the envelope, turned it over, his name on the front in Gerald Sinclair's handwriting, which he recognized despite everything, the slight backward slant of it, the way the C in Cole looped too wide. He'd seen that handwriting on contracts. On the letters of recommendation Jerry had written for him before everything fell apart. On a birthday card once, early on, when Adrian had first joined the company, and Jerry had seemed like the kind of man who remembered things like that. He set the envelope back down without opening it. Tell me what happened, he said. From your side. Renata turned from the window. You already know what happened. I know what happened to me, he said. I don't know your side of it. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she set her coffee down and said, My father told me. The words sat in the air between them. And you believed him, Adrian said. Not an accusation. Just a fact he was checking. I was 26, she said. He was my father. And he had documentation. He had falsified documentation. I know that now. Her voice stayed level, but there was something underneath it. The particular flatness of someone who has been angry for a long time and has gotten very good at not showing it. I found out 3 years ago. When I took over as CFO and went back through the 2013 audit files, there were discrepancies, things that didn't add up. I hired an outside firm to review everything. She stopped. It took them 4 months. Adrian said nothing. He'd been redirecting funds himself, Renata said, for years. Not a lot at once, never enough to trigger the threshold alerts. But it added up, and when the board started asking questions, he needed somewhere for the blame to land. She paused. You were the easiest target. You were new. You were talented, which meant you were threatening. And you were. She stopped. Black, Adrian said. Yes, she said quietly. Which meant that when he told certain people on that board a certain story, they were already halfway to believing it. The motion light clicked off outside. The backyard went dark. Why didn't you come to me then, he said. 3 years ago when you found out. I did find you, she said. It took me about 2 weeks to locate you, and then I sat outside this street in my car for 40 minutes and drove away. He stared at her. I didn't know what to say, she said. I still don't, honestly. There is no version of I'm sorry that fits what was done to you. You lost your career, you lost your marriage, I understand. The marriage was already in trouble, he said. That's not. Don't put that on him. She nodded slowly. But everything else, she said. Your reputation. 5 years of rebuilding what should have never needed to be rebuilt. I sat in that car and I thought about how any sentence I started would be the wrong sentence, and I drove away. She picked up her coffee again, though it was probably cold by now. And then my father got sick, and he asked me to come. And I thought if I drive away again, I'll have driven away twice, and at some point that becomes who I am. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaked, Zoe turning over in her sleep. Probably. What does the letter say? Adrian asked. I don't know. He wrote it himself, sealed it himself, handed it to me, and said, Give this to Adrian Cole. I haven't read it. Adrian picked up the envelope. He opened it. It took him a while to read it. Not because it was long, it wasn't, barely a page and a half, but because he had to stop twice and look at the ceiling and breathe in a particular way that wasn't quite crying but was adjacent to it. Gerald Sinclair had not, it turned out, written the letter Adrian expected. He hadn't explained himself. He hadn't listed his reasons or constructed a defense or tried to reframe what he'd done into something more palatable. He'd just written, in that too-wide looping handwriting, what he remembered. He remembered the quarterly meeting in March 2013, where Adrian had presented a restructuring plan that every member of the board had loved, and the way Jerry had felt, and he used the word afraid. He remembered calling his attorney the next week. He remembered the specific moment he'd made the decision, sitting in his car in the parking garage of the building he'd built, and what he'd told himself to make it feel acceptable. He wrote, I told myself you'd land somewhere, that a man like you would always land somewhere. I used that to sleep at night, and I'm ashamed of how well it worked. He wrote about the morning the board voted to terminate Adrian's contract and refer the matter to the state licensing board. He wrote, I watched you walk out of that building and I thought, This is the worst thing I have ever done. And then I went back into my office and I kept going. That's the part I can't forgive myself for, not the decision, the keeping going and at the end in slightly shakier handwriting than the rest. The hand of a man who had lost some steadiness. He wrote, "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't think I've earned that and I don't think it's the right thing to ask. What I'm asking is that you know I knew. I knew what I was doing, and I knew it was wrong, and I did it anyway, and I have had to live inside that knowledge every single day since, and whatever time I have left, I will keep living inside it. I wanted you to know that the man who did that to you did not get away clean. He carried it. He carries it now. I don't know if that helps. I suspect it doesn't. But I needed you to know." Adrian set the letter down on the table. Renata was watching him. She hadn't asked what it said. She was just watching him, with something in her expression that was very careful and very still, like someone who has learned not to assume how their presence will land. "He knew," Adrian said. "Yes, he knew the whole time. Yes." He pushed back from the table and stood up and walked to the back door and opened it. Just stood there for a minute, looking at the dark yard, the porch light coming on over his head. The night air was still warm, late May, with that particular quality of warmth that reminded him of the year he and Joanna had bought this house. Before Zoe, before the company, before all of it, and sat on this porch with takeout and talked about what their life was going to look like. He hadn't sat on this porch in a long time. He came back inside and sat down. "I built a landscaping business," he said. It wasn't what he'd meant to say, but it came out anyway. After the licensing board cleared me, which took 18 months. After Joanna and I separated. After I moved here with a 2-year-old and about $40,000 in savings and no idea what I was going to do. He looked at his hands. He had calluses now that he hadn't had in his corporate years. He'd stopped being self-conscious about them. I built it from 6 clients to 63. I have 4 employees. One of them, Marcus, has been with me since the beginning. He was my first hire. Showed up to an ad I posted on Craigslist because I couldn't afford to advertise anywhere better. His daughter and Zoe are in the same class now." He paused. "I like the work. I didn't think I would, but I do. There's something about it. You put something in the ground, you tend it, you come back, and it's different. It's grown." Renata was quiet. "I'm telling you this," Adrian said, "because I need you to understand something. Your father destroyed something, and it needed to be rebuilt, and I rebuilt it. And I didn't come out the other side of that needing to hold it over anyone. It doesn't serve Zoe. It doesn't serve me. What happened to me was wrong, and your father knew it was wrong, and now I know that he knew, and I don't know exactly what to do with that, but I don't think the answer is more anger." He was quiet for a moment. "I think he suffered," Adrian said. "I hope he suffered. I'm not proud of that, but it's honest. And I think he wrote that letter because suffering alone, without the person you wronged ever knowing you carried it, I think that became unbearable. I think he needed me to know, not for my sake, but for his, and he stopped. I think I can live with that. It's not justice, but it's something." Renata's hands were flat on the table. She was looking down at them. "I'm angry at him," she said quietly. "I want you to know that. I've been angry at him for 3 years, and I haven't known where to put it because he's my father and he's dying. And those two things don't cancel each other out. They just sit there, side by side, and I don't know what to do with either of them." "No," Adrian said. "They don't cancel each other out. I wanted to fix it," she said. "I wanted to. I went to our board 2 years ago and I told them what I'd found. We changed the way we report. We restructured the whole oversight system. I thought if I fixed the system, it would. I don't know what I thought it would do." She shook her head slightly. "It didn't fix anything for you. No, but it might fix something for the next person." She looked up. "That counts," he said. "I want you to know that counts." She left at 10:30. He walked her to the door. Not because it seemed necessary, but because it felt right, and they stood on the porch for a moment in the warm May night, and she said, "He wants to meet Zoe if you'd ever be willing." I told him I wouldn't ask, but he asked me to tell you he'd like to, and that he understands completely if the answer is no. Adrian looked at her. "That's a complicated thing to put on a child," he said. "I know. She doesn't know any of this. I know." He thought about it. He thought about Zoe at the kitchen table with Renata, brow furrowed over long division, trusting that the adult beside her was going to help her find the answer. He thought about the way Zoe talked about Marcus's daughter Priya at school, how they'd argued over something in September, and by November they were best friends, in the way that children sometimes are, fully, without reservation, without the need to explain the transition. "Tell him I'll think about it," Adrian said. "That's the honest answer." "The other thing he asked," she said, "was whether you'd be willing to speak with him directly. On the phone?" Or by video if traveling isn't. She stopped. You don't have to decide now. I know. He was quiet. Did you drive here from Charlotte? I drove down today. That's almost 3 hours. I know. He looked at her. She was standing in the porch light, and she looked, he thought, like someone who had been carrying something very heavy for a long time and had set it down in an unfamiliar place and wasn't sure if she was allowed to leave it there. Renata. He said her name the way she'd said his, checking. Yeah, whatever he asked you to do tonight, you didn't have to say yes. She was quiet for a moment. No, she said, I didn't. He held the door frame. I'll think about calling him, he said, and I'll think about letting him see Zoe. But I need you to hear me when I say that what I decide has nothing to do with his dying. I'm not doing it because he's out of time. If I do it, it's because Zoe deserves to know that the world is complicated and that people who do wrong things sometimes know they've done wrong things. And that doesn't make them monsters and it doesn't make them innocent. And learning to hold both of those at once is the hardest thing a person can do and also maybe the most important. Renata was looking at him in a way that was harder to read than anything else all evening. Not the steady professional assessment from the doorstep, not the careful watching from across the table. Something else. You would have been remarkable, she said quietly, in that company if he'd let you. He thought about his 4 employees, about Marcus who'd shown up to a Craigslist ad, about Zoe doing long division at the kitchen table, about the way it felt to put something in the ground and come back and find it had grown. I am remarkable, he said. I just grew somewhere else. She almost smiled. He thought she was about to say something, but she didn't. She just nodded once and walked down the porch steps and got into her car. He stood in the doorway and watched the headlights come on. 3 days later, he called Gerald Sinclair. The call lasted 42 minutes. Adrian didn't write down what was said. He didn't need to. Some things you hear once and they live in your body afterward. Not as memory exactly, but as weight distributed differently, shifted from one place to another. Afterward, he sat in the kitchen for a while. Then he went upstairs and stood in Zoe's doorway the way he sometimes did, just watching her sleep, the stuffed rabbit still tucked in the crook of her arm. She had his mother's nose and a laugh that came out of nowhere and a habit of asking questions that he couldn't always answer, which he had come to think of, not as a failure but as evidence that she would not stop asking. Not just him, not just about small things, but always, of everything for the rest of her life. He thought about what he'd said to Renata on the porch. He'd meant it, he still meant it. He went back downstairs and sat with his coffee at the kitchen table and thought about the envelope, which he'd put in the junk drawer after Renata left. Not thrown away, not filed, just put somewhere. He thought about the idea of letters written too late. He thought about the things people carry in silence for 11 years, 12, 20, until the silence becomes too heavy, and they have to hand it to someone else just to breathe. He wasn't sure forgiveness was the right word for what was happening inside him. It didn't feel like release. It felt more like rearranging, like taking a piece of furniture that had been in one corner for so long he'd stopped seeing it, and moving it somewhere else, and suddenly the room was the same room, but the light fell differently. He thought he could live in a room with the light falling differently. He picked up his phone and found Renata's number, which she'd written on the back of the envelope. Not her card, not a typed number, just her handwriting, which he had not expected to be similar to her father's but was in the backward slant in the wide curve of the R. He texted, I'm going to let's meet Zoe. This weekend if he's up to it. Just an hour. No pressure on either side. He set the phone down. Outside the night was quiet. The compost bin was unmolested. Somewhere down the street a dog was barking at something, insisting to anyone who would listen that something mattered. Something was there. He left the porch light on and went to bed, and for the first time in a very long time he slept before midnight.